Hello and welcome to Beyond Resilience, a new series of conversations exploring what is next for cultivating enterprise success and adaptability. I'm your host, Pascal Bornet. In my work implementing digital transformation and AI for decades, I've come to realize that success is no longer about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about being the most adaptive. And resilience, the ability to bounce back from shocks, has always been a key part of adaptability. But today, bouncing back is no longer enough. In this era of relentless change, resilience is just the entry ticket. To thrive, leaders need three things: foresight to anticipate, flexibility to adjust in real time, and forward motion to grow stronger after disruption. That's what we will discuss about today with our special guest, Gilg of SAP. Jan, SAP Business Suite sits at the intersection between AI, data, and enterprise systems. It doesn't just keep companies stable, it prepares them to turn volatility into advantage. Why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll get it from there.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Pascal, and welcome. As you said, my name is Jan Gilg. I'm the President and Chief Revenue Officer for SAP, and as such, I oversee our Americas region, which is really Latin America, North America, together, and some global functions for SAP. So I'm here for our customers.
Excellent. So welcome, and my first question is about you. About you and how you've evolved your role over time with the environment that we see today that is more complex and that is ever-changing.
Our industry has gone through a tremendous change over the last couple of years, I would say, maybe decades, from really being a company that builds on-premise software for companies to basically install on their own computers and run it towards providing software as a service for our customers. And that has a profound impact on how you develop software. That was my prior role. Okay. And it has a profound impact on also how we go to market and how do we sell to our customers. And that's my current role. And here it has also tremendously changed towards focusing on customer success. So that means it's not only about selling software to a customer and disappear. It is about helping customers to implement the software as quickly as possible, use the software, get value from the software, have a lot of users that are happy with the software because the feedback loops, they have become much, much faster. So it's really fundamentally a different world in which we operate in. And of course, technology plays a significant role, and it continues to drive and evolve also the role then of people that work in go-to-market.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you've been behind the scene, building the platform itself, and now you're talking about it
exactly.
for Americas and yeah, so you know what you're talking about. That's the key point.
No, absolutely, and I think that was also one of the reasons why I was offered that role here at SAP, because we do want to lead also on the go-to-market side with our products, with the value proposition. What is the outcome that the software can drive? It's not about the technology per se. It's really what can technology do for you. And I think it's good if you have this background actually and know a little bit about the sausage making, so to speak, to then also more credibly speak to our customers how we can support them.
Completely makes sense. Let's talk about resilience. Yes. And I'm curious to know, what is your definition of resilience? Do you see the definition of this word has changed over the last decades to something that is more adaptable, less a bounce back from challenges and more sustainable adaptability in a context that is ever evolving?
Yeah, I would fully agree, because it has almost become the norm. If you look back at the last 10 years, and we always like to talk about those big crises like COVID, the reality is it's never gone back to what you consider normal before. Yes. So resilience is really something that becomes a central attribute or characteristic for every company. And we've talked about resilient supply chains quite a bit, specifically during COVID, when all of a sudden, supply chains broke, and we realized the whole globalization has driven very fragmented supply chains and also very fragile ones. Before, I felt there was always a lot of optimization on cost and being as efficient as possible, and that is still super important. But resilience means then also to be able to adapt really quickly. And I think that goes to what you mentioned about flexibility.
Yes.
So having then also an IT infrastructure and systems that are able to reconfigure really quickly. And that is why, in my mind, cloud solutions have become so essential, because in an on-premise world where you have a product that's customized to specifically one company, it's become really very inflexible. And companies were not able to change anything, especially not quickly. So you talk 6 months, 12 months, 18 months for a change, when in reality you only have maybe a week or so to react.
I think you've heard about this quote that says that in the coming 10 years, we will see as many changes and innovations that we've seen in the last 100 years. How do you think SAP's platform and what the work you've been doing can help companies size the opportunities and mitigate the risks?
Yeah, I think some of the aspects I touched on when we talked about the foresight and the ability to react very quickly. And the way SAP supports that, on the one hand side, is all of our solutions, they run in the cloud, right? So they come as a software as a service. We try to, or we ship really what we call best practices for processes, where we say, hey, we are working with 10,000s of customers, and the largest companies in the world are our customers. We know how they run an accounts payable process, how they run an accounts receivable process. There's nothing to reinvent, and there's also typically not really a differentiation for most companies in most industries. So why not just use that kind of a standard process? And by the way, if you do that, then the data that is generated from this process is something that can be leveraged much more to drive the foresight again, because you can bring it together across your entire customer base, which we are doing, of course, in an anonymized way, to really then help customers understand how they can continuously optimize. So one topic is really automation of processes, which has been the value proposition of ERP systems from the very beginning.
Completely makes sense. One of our aims with these conversations is to uncover how enterprise management systems can deliver customers beyond simple resilience to what I like to call a sustainable adaptability. What does that future look like from SAP's perspective, and how can an ERP platform enable it?
So I think the role of ERP is really also changing. So I see already a big shift from kind of this transactional process view towards the data layer, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, business processes will be automated more and more. And companies, we see that clearly, they all want to standardize where they don't differentiate. So in an ideal world, you have basically the majority of companies run very similar processes in ERP to where they don't see differentiation, where they don't have value creation. And with that, you increase then the level of automation, of course. And so that is really at the core of what an ERP system does. And so it becomes almost invisible, right? And now the question is, where's the innovation happening? And in my mind, that is really happening then on the layer above, where you tap now into this data. Because if you think about those processes, they generate data which is very, very valuable, because the data describes how businesses run across the world. And then you can read literally, what does that mean for business KPIs like day sales outstanding? What's a good number here for a specific customer in a specific industry or geography? And you have all this available, and now you can basically build those innovations on top. We call that intelligent apps. So that really then take advantage of this data to drive really insights that probably companies didn't have before.
And this opens the door also to my next question to you. So let's talk about business suites and And so we call it business suite, suite like a hotel suite.
Yes.
Which has different rooms.
Yes.
I understand it this way. And so I would love you to give us a tour of those different rooms and see how those doors are open, basically.
Yes, exactly. So it's a nice analogy, because at the end, you can say those different rooms, they are all applications. So you have an application for procurement and one for finance and one to manage your supply chain. The doors are all open because that is the fact that they are integrated. And they're not only open doors, the rooms are actually, they look pretty similar, because it would be weird to walk into a hotel suite and all the rooms are painted differently, different furniture, completely different styles. Maybe if it's a theme hotel, that might be accurate, but typically you don't expect that. So you want a harmonized experience, and that is actually what we offer by harmonizing the data models between those different applications and harmonizing the user experience and how it looks like and feels. And I like that you talked about information before, and not only data, because that's exactly the point. When you create data, it's first of all, in the first place, it's useless, right? Because you need to make sense out of it, and that has to do with semantic and understanding. How is a shipment now related to my order, and how is that related to a financial posting at the end of the day? And that semantic we are exposing and we are sharing across our applications so that it comes together as a suite. And again, you have the visibility then across and really talk about information that you can derive from that. And that is the concept of the business suite.
So we talked about open doors. Let's talk about open source, and I think your role in guiding the transition from on-premises to cloud gives you a unique perspective on that point. So open source, once viewed as suspicious, is now seen as an engine of adaptability. How do you see its role in helping companies future-proof not just for resilience, but for continuous evolution? And beyond that, why is offering customers a choice of large language models itself a form of resilience, or even better, a form of foresight, as we said before?
Yeah, so first of all, I fully agree, and I remember when I joined SAP, it was in the on-premise world, open source was a really bad word. So nobody would think we should ever touch it in a very closed shop environment, proprietary, that we had. And then the cloud really opened this up, and also our thinking, and then we came out with our first version of our cloud platform. And we realized we have to tap into open source, and open source is something that can be extremely valuable because the power of community is really huge. When you think about how many very intelligent people work on those kind of capabilities, it's really hard to match. So you have to be very selective, and that was our learning path as a company. Where do you build capabilities yourself because you believe this is really differentiating then for us as SAP, versus what are things that are just expected as part of a platform, and you use open source and you tap into the community and everybody uses it anyway, right? And then I think the second aspect, and that's a little bit of a nuance, is openness. To say, okay, in the cloud world, you also have to acknowledge that customers run heterogeneous environments. They don't only run SAP, even though we would wish that, but that's not the reality. So we have to be open, we have to adhere to open standards, protocols, APIs, and so on. And then now the world of AI and agentic takes us on a whole different level. I'm sure we'll talk about that as well.
You just talked about agentic AI. Everybody talks about it currently. And I know it's part of SAP now. In the platform, you've incorporated some agentic capabilities.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about those capabilities and how they enable your clients to be more resilient and adaptable?
Yeah, so I mean, it's clearly a shift that's going on in the software industry towards agentic. What is, of course, the big question in my mind is now you can always optimize then a silo. You touched on that earlier. And I think it's a good thing, and you should do that. We have customers like the Western Sugar Corporation. It's a US customer. They optimize their invoicing processes, and they save, I think, 25% of time now in processing invoices. But that's one siloed use case that is optimized. So now we are talking about, again, end-to-end processes in the enterprise, and the question is, so how do you make all those agents now work together? Because often a task is not that single dimensional, right? So it's multidimensional. You have to basically have an impact maybe on supply chain if you do something, or you have an impact on procurement, and now agents need to communicate with each other, and that's where it becomes complicated. Goes back to my analogy earlier. When you have all those different SaaS solutions, every vendor is going to throw agents at you, right? Now you have maybe one SaaS solution and you have 50 agents on top, and now they might be able to communicate with each other, but how do they communicate with the other SaaS application and their agents? And that, I believe, is then again a huge advantage when you run a business suite, because our agents, they will be able to communicate out of the box with each other and hand over tasks then along a process to really get it done completely end to end. And with that, you can address much more complex scenarios than a single invoicing optimization or matching. And that's, by the way, still one of the biggest challenges is the silos that exist at every company. I mean, even at SAP, it's a constant fight to break up the silos and have exactly those kind of handovers between departments. And that is where a lot of operational efficiency is lost. And that's why I believe we are really at the brink of a new era of intelligent operations, because, to your point, agents don't care about organizational silos, and they just want to get the job done as efficient as possible. So that's why I really think we will see another leapfrog now in terms of productivity gains.
Completely makes sense, and I think it's important to use the technology purposely as well. So in the sense of mitigating those challenges, those risks, and not implementing technology for the sake of implementing it. I understand you really connect the risks factors and the opportunity and the capabilities of technology.
Yeah, and we see that a lot now that many of our customers are moving with their ERP estate also into the cloud, into the modern world, so to speak. It is a big project. And 10 years ago, a lot of this was very technology driven. And to say, I understand there's end of life for software, there is new generations of technology, so let's do a technology upgrade to stay current, and then I know I'm safe for the next 10 years maybe. But at the end of the day, based on this changing environment over the last couple of years and the uncertainty that was injected, companies realized it needs more, and maybe it's even an opportunity to set yourself up for success for the next decade to come. And that means really rethinking, am I doing the way I do my business, the way I run my operations, is that the best way of doing it? Does it give me the flexibility that is needed in that kind of environment, or do I need to maybe adjust?
On innovation, you've spoken about co-innovating with customers.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so that's a concept we have for quite some time already. Traditionally, always invited customers to innovate with us in the sense that we develop software together, and they bring in requirement, they bring in insight, and we do this often by industry, because if you think about it, most industries, there are a handful of leading players. If they come together and say, those are some of the things that we all need, you can be pretty sure that the rest of the industry will follow and will need that as well. So often we have really used those large companies to build software, next generation software, new capabilities together with them, which we call co-innovation. The world of AI has almost propelled that even more so, where we now go in with our forward deployed engineers, and we work with our customers on specific AI use cases and then retrofit them into our product.
Finally, let's circle back. So if resilience is no longer the bar, if foresight, flexibility, and forward motion are the real standard, How do you ensure SAP embodies that shift in its own strategy?
So in our strategy, we will continue to make sure we, have and strengthen the partner ecosystem that surrounds us, that we stay open to technology, and that we really focus on where we are strong, which is to support end-to-end business processes in a very integrated way. And of course, make it very easy for the end user to use our software, and things like digital assistants and so on is going to be the main vehicle to use enterprise software as well. And we are embracing that, and we'll continue to invest in that direction. I believe that sets us up also for success for the years to come.
Excellent. What is the key message or last message that you want to share with the audience regarding resilience and adaptability and how SAP enables all that?
Yeah, I think goes back to our discussion on technology for technology's sake. I really believe companies have an opportunity right now to update and modernize their IT environments and really embrace that, to have a hard look into how to optimize the way they are working and how they can use technology now to really achieve a leapfrogging in productivity gains and in insights. And that is what you should use as almost a North Star to guide your decision making then, on an ERP modernization, for example. So in my mind, that is much, much more powerful and will then also help justify business cases and also will help justify investment in technology, because at the end of the day, every customer, every C-level has the pressure to, do more with less. And I think technology is at the point where it is very, very mature, or mature enough to really help drive that. And that needs to be front and center of every business case.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you very much for sharing all this with you. I think it's been very enriching for me and for the audience. We now understand better what resilience and adaptability means in the context of SAP and the platform and the companies you're supporting. Thanks a lot for that. And thank you for joining us. Look for the next episode of Beyond Resilience coming soon.